Hello there, I'm Rafael de Furia, back at it again on a Wednesday night, early Thursday morning, for another video, back at it again from the land of confusion, having taken a note from the local government, bringing you the updates that you've been waiting for in the middle of the night when everybody else is fast asleep. Tonight we are back to talk about some more updates here from Italy, and including some of the most recent updates from the Italian government about the current situation here. Unfortunately, lockdowns are coming, but before we get too much deeper into this video and talk about that, a huge thank you to those of you who helped to make these videos possible. Really, thank you so much for being part of these videos and helping to make them possible and for allowing me to continue with this project. And of course, a huge thank you to those of you who are also subscribed and who have been liking these videos and sharing them with your friends, because that also very much does help out the channel. And also for those of you who are interested in supporting the channel in another way, maybe having a little something to show for it, it is never too early to get started with your Christmas shopping. And for those of you who are really feeling the situation where you are, especially those of you in America currently dealing with the election situation over there, that's it. I am moving to Italy. Posters, shirts, baby onesies, cell phone cases, mugs, and more are available on rafaeldefuria.com/NYAG gear. Links are down below. And yes, I happen to have pizza on my wall now. Not sure if you can see it. I may have to work on the lighting in here to fix some of the reflections. But anyway, talking about some of the protests that have been going on, just to begin this evening's video, just because that's been something that's been quite prevalent in the news. Although this week, it's been kind of fading out, and it seems as though things are quieting down, or at the very least, they haven't been talked about as much in the news recently. But earlier this week, on Sunday evening, I did happen to go to film another protest that happened here in the town where I live. The protest was a lot smaller, but one thing that I could say was that people seemed a lot more frustrated. And something that I mentioned in a previous video was that the Interior Ministry said they saw that these protests were being organized not by a central unit, not by a central organization, but by all different sorts of groups, even those that are to the extreme left and the extreme right. And that was something that I believe at least one of you mentioned on my last video, and I did get a private message if that was something that I had seen. There were some of you that seemed to be surprised that it wasn't just people leaning in one direction or the other, but people who happen to have various different viewpoints. And I didn't see any extremists here at the protest here in Rovigo. Well, maybe not extremists, but people who were definitely extremely frustrated. Even within the crowd itself, you could see that there were people who disagreed with each other, and they made that very clear. There were people calling other people fascists, communists, this, that, the other. There were a lot of these words being thrown around. But then also you saw just the average shop owner or the average worker. And then you also saw business people there. You saw a little bit of everybody, like in that first protest that I went to film here in Rovigo. Although this time there were definitely fewer children. And even though there were all of these names and insults being thrown back and forth across the crowd, the one thing that was clear was that they were all there in agreement that they were not okay with the current situation and how it has been handled. Throughout the time that I was there, there was a common theme that had been shouted out by many people there, that they were not interested in stimulus checks. They just wanted to go back to work. So I found that actually very interesting personally. But even what I also found interesting was that a lot of the organizers and speakers who were there at the event were not well received by the crowd. And at many points throughout the event, at least while I was there, they lost control over the crowd, and the crowd was shouting at them and disagreeing with them, and they were not happy with these speakers. And I think that some of these speakers weren't just business owners, but also local politicians. That I'm not totally clear on, because that was a point that for me wasn't made clear, that I didn't understand necessarily who was who and what the importance or significance of each person was. But again, just before we move on, I have to say that I really am fascinated that people from all different backgrounds politically agreed on the same issue. Not necessarily the way of moving forward, but they all pretty much agreed on the same points. Anyway, getting back to the latest updates that we've seen here from Italy. late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. Like I said, I am up late doing this video just like the Italian government is putting out their updates. They were working late into the night and released very late in the night or early in the morning, depending on how you look at it. Now, what we are seeing will be some of the newest restrictions here in Italy. And throughout the first half of the week, it had been circulating around the news that the government would be making a new set of restrictions. The biggest one that had probably the most rumors that I had seen was that there would be the curfews put into place. There had been a lot of talk about different times being thrown around for possible curfews. At first, we were hearing the times could be as early as 6 p.m., then 9 p.m. I had heard a lot of different rumors throughout the week. And then even at one point, Conte got up and said something along the lines of old people not being important, and then backpedaled the hell out of that one. Whatever, that's a whole thing that I'm not going to get into. I am digressing here. But this newest DPCM that we are seeing is calling for curfews of 10 o'clock. And the thing is also that's interesting to me is that this update, the newest update, was not supposed to come for about another week or so. But because of the situation here in Italy, they had moved this up until about now. But these restrictions will not come into place until Friday the 6th. It seems as though the cases here in Italy have somewhat stabilized for the past couple of days here. They are still quite high, but thankfully not as high as many other places. According to a number of news sources here and the numbers that I've been seeing, it seems to be at a somewhat stabilized level for the moment. So hopefully we only see these numbers just plateau and drop off from here. And hopefully the restrictions that we are going to be seeing will actually make a difference, because I know for a lot of people, it is making their lives very difficult. I've spoken with a number of business owners here where I live, and that I know a lot of businesses have been very severely affected and are potentially going to have to close. But before we get into the bad news, maybe let's talk about a little bit of good news that may be a relief to some. And during the last lockdown, we heard a lot of complaints from, I would say, roughly about half of the nation's population, maybe just a little bit over. I don't have the exact numbers, but I would say that's probably a fair estimate. But coming from this segment of the population, we heard a lot of complaints about the closures of salons and barbershops. But worry no more, praise the big man upstairs. Many of these establishments shall remain open moving forward. So, hallelujah, we shall be shaved. Jokes aside, bad jokes especially. Let's get into what is really going on here. In this new DPCM, we also are seeing the reintroduction of the self-certification forms that we saw earlier this year. We did see them a little bit in some of these minor lockdowns that we did see just recently near Rome. But we are also seeing yellow zones, orange zones, and red zones. But what are these new zones, you may be asking? I have a feeling that they're kind of on the self-explanatory side, but at the same time, I do feel as though it is worth diving into just a little bit more, because it is quite complex. And even when this DPCM was first put out, there was a lot of clarifications that it did not make. And even I would say now, later on, once some of these clarifications had been made, there are still a lot more that seem to be not quite so clear. But let's start out with the lowest level that I've seen so far, yellow. I've seen this referred to online also as green. It's gone by both names, but as far as I'm aware, the Italian government is referring to these places as yellow zones. And the rules seem to be very similar to what we've been having so far recently. And of course, to hear a little bit more about those, you can watch some of my recent update videos that I've made. But what's new and being introduced now again is the self-certification forms and also the curfew at 10 p.m. And that's around the whole country. That's not just one area, that's the whole nation. There are a lot of new rules that we are seeing being put into effect nationwide, and these happen to be two of them. However, it is possible to go out after 10 p.m. for proven needs. This is a term that we've seen a couple of times being used here in this new DPCM, but what it seems to be is for emergencies, health, and work. And even though theoretically you are supposed to have the self-certification form with you, the police are carrying them and will be doing random checks. And if it is determined that your reasoning for being out isn't sufficient, they are saying they will be reporting those people. Also, one thing that I can say on a personal note is that I am very grateful that where I live is being called a yellow zone. At least that's the way it seems to be for the time being, because as we go on, the orange and red zones do put a lot more restrictions in place. But onto the orange zones. They will have measures in place for 15 days. And I believe even this evening, Conte said specifically no less than 14 days. Also, you will not be able to enter or exit the region without proven needs. And again, you also will need the self-certification form. Restaurants, bars, pubs, gelaterias, and pastry shops will have to close. However, it seems as though food delivery will always be allowed as long as the rules are followed. And for takeaway food, that will be allowed up until 10. But these rules don't necessarily apply for refueling stations like gas stations on the side of the highway or hospitals, as long as the 1 meter rule is enforced. And you also will be able to do physical and sporting activities as long as it is within the municipality where you live, and also outdoors, but gyms, sports centers, and pools will be closed. And then regarding interregional travel, that's something that we're seeing in the orange zones and the red zones interacting with the yellow zones, that's actually being put into in a very interesting way. That was one of the biggest questions that had come up this week, because there had also been a lot of rumors and talk about these different color-coded zones and what that would mean. Would you be able to travel between them and so on? While we get into the subject of the red zones, let's talk about the interregional travel here, because at this point, in the red zones and the orange zones, there's no interregional travel allowed. You can't travel into or out of. But if you live in a yellow zone or an area that does not have any travel restrictions, then you can transit through one of these other areas on the way to your destination. So it seems as though you're not able to stop, but theoretically you could go between two different areas. So I would assume this means that if you are a resident of a orange zone or a red zone, that you can't travel to another orange or red zone through a yellow zone. But if we're talking about children in the red zones, then they can go to school within the established limits for face-to-face learning for children in kindergarten through middle school. However, high schools are supposed to be 100% distance learning now. All shops in the red zones will be closed other than grocery stores. Pharmacies, tobacco shops, and newsstands will be open. And for many people outside of Italy, having a tobacco shop be open sounds like it may be a little bit of a strange idea. This is something that I believe I mentioned earlier this year when we had the lockdowns. In Italy, the tobacco shops here serve a very vital function within Italian society. It's not just a place where you go get your nick fix. It is a place where you can also go pay bills and taxes and take care of other payments that are necessary, whatever those might be. But if you are the type of person who does like to go on runs, individual physical activity will only be allowed in the vicinity of one's home. But earlier this week, I spoke to an Italian friend of mine, and he was very frustrated. He's somebody who keeps up with the rules and what goes on here. And his opinion was that in these new rules, at least the last rules, and even these new ones that we're seeing, that there are a lot of points that aren't really well defined and aren't very clear. So it made me feel personally better that it's not just, I don't feel like I'm necessarily limited by the language in this case, because I thought I was understanding things pretty well, but still seeing that there were points that I wasn't understanding and was trying to figure out, was it that there are nuances in the language that I just wasn't picking up, or is it my language skills just are so poor? But this friend of mine was saying that even though Italian is his first language, he also felt as though that there wasn't enough clarification in what we've been seeing and even in this new one, and that it's very confusing. I would be unable to say that I'm surprised that there would be a bit of complication and that it would be tricky, because there are a lot of things in Italy that do end up being this way. This is just one of the realities, if you're thinking about life abroad, that you do have to consider that things function differently in different countries. Because you come from one place, you can't come with the expectation that things will be organized in the same way as where you're from. And this is a point that I know for a lot of American, British, and Australian expats, and expats from New Zealand, and especially German expats, is that going from one country to another, that the organization level of the country can be a very frustrating point. And this can be seen in various aspects of life. And the thing is, it doesn't just frustrate people who come from abroad, but it also can frustrate the people who are in the country. But the thing is, of course, like I've said in previous videos, wherever you decide to make your life, you have to be willing to live with certain aspects that are not always ideal. Every place has its own thing that you have to deal with. You just have to take into consideration, what is it that you're willing to live with and deal with? Because maybe there's something that is in your country that you are not okay with, but in another country, you would be okay with dealing with how things work there, even if it may not be perfect. What is it that you are looking for out of life? And anyway, these are things that I have talked about quite a bit on this channel. So I will end this video off here. Of course, as always, a huge thank you to those of you who help to make these videos possible on a monthly basis through Patreon. Thank you so much for being a part of these videos and helping them to come out, and for helping me to be able to continue this project. Thank you so much. And of course, a huge thank you to those of you who have liked these videos and shared these videos, and of course have subscribed to this channel. Thank you all for all of your support. Also, because things have been so serious in my videos recently, on Friday, I'm hoping to be able to upload something that is a little bit different, something that I have definitely never done on this channel before, that I'm really looking forward to. It's something that's been kind of going on in the background for a little bit now, but I won't say too much now. I'm hoping, assuming that there are no major updates between now and Friday, this Friday's video will be a little bit more lighthearted, just because we've been so serious lately. I think it's time maybe to have a little bit of fun and talk about the things that I know a lot of you are subscribed to this channel for, about living in Italy and life in Italy. So stay tuned, and that will be out hopefully on Friday. I really hope, not just so that I can put out the video. I'm tired of more restrictions. This is already a lot. Of course, as always, I'm Rafael di Furia. Thank you again so much for joining me for another video. I look forward to seeing you guys again on Friday for this week's second video. Stay safe, stay healthy. Later.